and welcome to Man's Model Moments. Recently I reviewed ICM's 1/35th scale Ukrainian Leopard 2, which was actually a reboxed Revell kit, and I'll link that video here if you've not already seen it. I showed this kit, its 1/72nd scale little brother, on a live stream unboxing of ICM releases, and it should come as no surprise to anyone that this is also another Revell reboxing, this time of their 2011 tool. Revell themselves have released this kit with different parts as several different iterations of the Leopard 2, the most recent being the A7V released this year. Now ICM's version comes in its normal glossy cover over sturdy box format, which is a definite upgrade from Revell's boxings. Inside is Revell's single bag of plastic, ICM's additional plastic and photo etch parts, and the ICM instruction booklet. As usual, the front cover gives us ICM's standard breakdown of colour artwork with a small piece of description, vehicle specifications and the colour chart key. The first page then has the usual full frame layout guides, including the photo etch sheet. Moving on to the construction, we can see this follows a pretty familiar formula, though I was interested to see that the tracks in this vehicle are supplied in two segments, like their 1/35th scale kit, but in plastic rather than vinyl as in the larger scale. The instructions call for you to heat these in hot water and then bend them around the wheels, something I've never seen before. This was also a bit surprising given that I've made several 1/72nd scale AFVs from this period in Revell's tooling history, and they all supplied tracks as length and link. The build then progresses without anything unusual until the final step, which comes to putting the new applique armour on. ICM have provided plastic brackets for the cage armour, which is photo etch itself, meaning no horrific photo etch bracket making, which is a blessing. The instructions then give you two sides, each with two schemes, though they are all the standard 3-colour NATO pattern used by their German donors. The decal sheet is tiny, as most are for AFVs in this scale, and it gives you plenty of Ukrainian markings if you wanted to use them on other vehicles that don't have them. They're well printed, with good colour register and density as usual. The first frame carries the main hull components, moulded in Revell's current standard slightly warm grey coloured plastic. The hull has a lot of the finer detail moulded on, and the finish and detail across these large components is pretty good. You can also see Revell are using very similar components as for their 1/35th scale kit, with this internal hull insert being almost identical to its larger brethren's. That all makes sense, there's little point in reinventing the wheel here after all. The next frame is very busy, carrying the plethora of wheels and suspension parts, as well as those two-piece tracks. Now on the 1/35th scale kit I had a slightly warped upper and lower hull, whereas here it's this frame that was warped. Now being full of small components that probably won't have much, if any, effect, but it's slightly concerning that this is the third Revell kit in a row that I've had warped frames on. We then step down a little to this frame, which bears the very large turret of the Leopard. This simplifies the multi-component makeup of the larger kit a little, which makes sense, but it still carries some really nice cast detail over its surface. That's also the same for the other pieces on this frame. We then have two small frames, one bearing an unused lower hull piece and skirts, the other the single piece main barrel, though it does have a separate muzzle. In macro view you can see the detail on these parts, and it's pretty good for 1/72nd scale. The main drive sprockets are particularly good, crisply moulded with very little flash. The main wheels aren't quite as good, with some of their rubber outers being distinctly asymmetrical, though I don't imagine any of this will translate through and be visible when built. Speaking of building, let's crack on. The build itself starts with the construction of the hull, and for those of you who have built or have seen the video on the 1/35th scale kit, this has a very familiar feel. That's not a bad thing, since the locating tabs and internal bulkhead make all of this go together easily and feel very solid. Next are the suspension units, which are small but fit well. The suspension arms are a breeze, whilst the idler wheels just require tweezers to get them into position. Next up are the wheels, which all have locating pins which provide a positive fit. The sprocket drive wheels are keyed, so they have no wiggle room in them, and this is all essentially a miniaturised version of the 1/35th scale kit. The front idler and track tensioner has this little piece on the side, which although fiddly isn't really an issue. We then have to mount all of those wheels, which takes a while to ensure they're all aligned, but it isn't problematic in any way. We then come to the tracks, which I immersed in just boiled water until they became slightly pliant and gently started to bend them to shape. The tricky bit is to then get them over the wheels as they cool quickly, and immersing them again is hard when they're already on the tank. Then trying to dry them and cement them is difficult, as they still want to revert to their former shape somewhat. Unfortunately, this just doesn't work. After this first limited success, the other tracks actually broke, and I ended up cutting them into links and gluing them as best I could, hoping to rely on the track shields hiding the ugliest elements. Why Revell departed from a tried and tested solution that they've employed in other kits, and didn't go with length and link here is beyond me. These abominations behind me, I could complete the hull with the right side. And then the hull top. And finally the rear. All of these pieces go together really well. The front mudguards fit easily into place as well. The very front piece of the applique side armour is a little tricky and took a couple of attempts to get right. The main piece of that armour then goes on, and actually that helps seat the front piece, which was a bit tricky. The side skirt then goes on and under this applique armour, which sounds more difficult than it actually is, as you can hopefully see here. There's then a whole bunch of little bits that go on the back, like the tow hooks. All of these go on well, but are of course very small and fiddly. The barrel travel lock can then go on the back of the hull. And then we have another odd part of this kit, the two-part tow cables. The first piece of them just goes onto the hull top. And then the second one goes on the back and sort of bends over the corner to connect to the first. This doesn't really work, and I'd definitely recommend cutting off the ends and replacing the actual cables with wire. My driver's hatch needed a little trimming on the hull for it to seat properly, but it was a simple thing to remedy. All the front armour stowage is next, and all of this goes on without any locating issues. The front towing lugs, like the rear ones, are fiddly but locate with few issues, whereas the headlamps require a bit more time and patience. That leaves the barrel cleaning rods to go on, and then we can put the hull assembly aside for the moment. Now I just want to take a moment to thank all of you who have supported me directly through YouTube memberships and Patreon. This really does keep the channel going, and without you it would be very difficult for me to be able to continue doing this. Now if you're only just seeing your name on here for the first time, it's because I update this monthly, and if I've prepared some videos ahead of time, then there may still have the old list on, even if the list has been updated since then. Don't worry though, your name will get on the list and will continue to appear throughout your support. If you are considering supporting me, YouTube channel membership is by far the easiest way to do this, since Patreon is becoming a more challenging platform to engage with. Whichever you choose, however, I absolutely appreciate your contributions, and don't forget to come and check out the private members Discord, which you get access to at any level. We then turn our attention to the turret, starting with the main gun. This is keyed very positively into the mantlet, and as you can see I glued it and then put it in a couple of times to ensure I got cement in all of that area. The top armour piece then goes in place, which then allows the side pieces to key in very positively. The turret lower front also keys very nicely to the floor with the turret ring, though again I moved it about a bit to ensure there was a nice deep bond across the whole contact area. The rear keys in the same way, and the broad contact areas here make these simple parts of the build. Time to mount the gun. I cemented the left side of the bracket into the turret, and then push fitted the right side onto the gun, which then allowed me to put cement in place on the turret and then put the barrel assembly in without getting cement anywhere near the pivot point. Onto the upper hull, and before we can do anything with this we need to put the optics in. This is a really fiddly part to get into place and seated correctly, and it's worth taking your time checking over it from both sides to ensure it looks right and that there are no gaps. Now, having built the 1/35 scale kit, I was familiar with the way the top armour of the barrel has to slide over the turret top, which is the only thing to watch out for here, since the rest of this is just cementing everything all round and making sure you don't get glue on the barrel pivot points if you care about the barrel moving at all. The turret side armour is a very simple application. Which then brings us to the cheek armour. This is designed so it can move about its hinge in the centre, with the forward part trapping the rear in place. Now I wasn't going to do anything fancy here, so I just glued mine into position. The rear turret bin back is another simple piece. But these two little pieces that go onto it are not as easy, not having the same positive fit as most of the other small elements. The three lift rings on top of the turret are the complete opposite. I thought they'd be fiddly, but they actually fit very positively, though you will ideally need tweezers to handle them. The turret hatches are nice little assemblies that again echo the larger scale kit. And the cupola rings are also pretty easy to fit too, with the proviso of course that these are all small pieces due to the scale. The turret hatch assemblies then fit very nicely into these, though because they're so small there's little room for error, so it does take a little bit to get them seated perfectly, as you can see with this one here. The commander's periscope fits on easily with the aid of tweezers again. Now, as for the larger kit, you can opt for open or closed optics doors here, and I opted for open. That means cutting the part along the join line and cementing the two parts into position. This does add a small amount of work and an extra tweezer step, but as you can see, it's not too bad. The machine gun mount was next, and this is one of those parts you know you will break off and will have to be repaired at several points in the future. You'll see that in the end photos. The last of the optics can then go onto the turret before we get into more fiddly sub-assemblies. The first of these are the smoke launchers. These are constructed in exactly the same way as on the 1/35th scale kit, but with parts half the size in every dimension. Fortunately, the locating lugs on these are pretty positive, and apart from their diminutive size, they actually go together pretty well. I actually prefer not to use tweezers for these sorts of things, as I feel I have more control in handling the parts without them. Once made, these can be applied to the turret sides, and though there's only a single locating point, they do go on pretty well. We then come to the stowage baskets. Mine had some huge pieces that needed trimming off and cleaning up, which immediately didn't enamour them to me. Revell have also used another innovation here, in that 3 sides of the basket are folded up from one piece of plastic. With the rear being cemented on and holding it in place. This might sound clever, but it's not, with these pieces being no easier to make than a basket made of individual pieces, and looking worse, especially with those stressed plastic corners. For what they're worth, they fit okay on the hull, but honestly, I'd replace these completely as they're horribly out of scale anyway. Now I'd forgotten the front of this main optic, so I placed it on here. And then it was time for the large grab handles on the cheek armour. These fit just fine with tweezers, but you may want to replace them with slightly finer items. I was then on to the smaller items like the gun muzzle, which needed a little cleanup before fitting. And then finally the wing mirrors, which I put in the stowed position. The turret could then be mounted onto the main hull, and that was the main Revell part of the kit complete. That takes us to the ICM provided parts and the photo etch. Now I know many people hate using it, but this is about as basic as it gets in this kit, and I can tell you the main hurdle to get over is removing the plastic cover from it. This clip is at 10 times speed, meaning it took me 2.5 minutes to free the metal from its plastic cover without bending it. Once that's done, however, getting the pieces from the fret is simple. The joining parts are very thin and a blade cuts them easily with no deformation to the parts. Once free, the little lugs can be filed, sanded or, as I'm doing here, trimmed with a blade. Then I just used my usual Loctite Precision Max to secure the additional armour plates to the sides and front. The front piece actually goes on over the 2 towing lugs, and none of these were any issue at all. Then we hit a snag. ICM provide plastic brackets to attach the cage armour, but where to attach these on both the tank and armour is not clear, and one of the supplied brackets, part 2, isn't used, so don't cut them off the sprue before using them because they are different. In the instructions it shows using 5 brackets, but I couldn't align these with what was shown in the 3 views of the tank, which only use 4, so I sort of guesstimated based on all of this information, gluing the brackets to the PE to start with after bending it in a couple of positions as indicated. Trying to attach that to the turret, however, proved problematic. There are no obvious seating points, the assembly didn't naturally fit anywhere, and after attempting for some time and scratching my head over this, I decided to just leave them off. I then primed the model in Autotech Grey and sprayed it using Tamiya NATO Green, Brown and Black, masking it with AK Putty and Liquitex Liquid Mask. So there's a few things to say about this kit. The actual tank is pretty good, but it is let down by a few areas. The first of these are the turret side baskets, which are clunky and out of scale, and the weird building mechanism doesn't help. I think these are best replaced by aftermarket or scratch built items. Similar to that are the 2-piece tow cables, which are awkward to put on, break really easily and don't look that good. But then these are easy to replace with wire, so that's not so bad. The worst offender, however, is Revell's unfathomable decision to go with the 2-piece heat-to-bend plastic tracks. I would have preferred rubber band tracks to these, but why they didn't go with length and link like on their other excellent 1/72nd scale armour produced at this time, I have no idea. They just don't work, and they're such a fundamental part of the tank, I'm not sure how else you deal with this. The last thing to note are the ICM provided parts. The photo etch is really nice and easy to work with, but because they were made after the tank, there's no really positive fit to the turret for the rather large brackets, which makes them almost impossible to use. So overall, this kit was a bit of a slog. Add to this that the completed model is quite fragile in areas, and it's easy to break off pieces when painting and finishing. It's why mine has no MG mount and part of one rear tow cable is missing, and you end up with quite a frustrating build. Now it does build up into a decent representation of the Leopard 2, and the Ukrainian theming is a nice touch, but I'm not sure it all works. I know that both Meng and Trumpeter do Leopard 2s in this scale. Plasmo built the Meng one a couple of years ago, but they are substantially more expensive than this kit, being around the £20 to £25 mark compared to the £15 of this, and they don't feature the extra parts or Ukrainian markings. So I guess as usual it comes down to what you want. If it's a painless build experience, this is not the kit for you, whereas if you really want a 1/72nd scale Ukrainian Leopard 2, then this is really the only option, unless you want to start kit bashing, which is going to increase the cost as well. For me, I think I'd just stick with the far easier to work with and more rewarding 1/35th scale option, especially with the ICM crew. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.